And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Tonight's featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Welcome to the Republic News Network for our live national broadcast. You may call me Kelby, and tonight I'm going to be acting as your moderator. The RNN, which stands for the Republic News Network, has been doing this radio show since 2010, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. Here we go. It's true. The United States is a federal corporation, and their exclusive jurisdiction is in the District of Columbia. The Republic government was simply a bunch of U.S. citizens that in law don't have access to the Bill of Rights. And they realized they wanted to be Americans, as our founders and our law provided each and every one of us. See, we've been hard at work since 2008, and since 2010 we have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Lincoln in 1861. I know, it's hard to understand. Don't worry. We are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government, and we love our country. You can consider the Republic members are tired of the corruption that we see every day. See, we found in the law that there is two forms of government here on the land, and we did something about it. We are people. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. We have families just like you. We simply found some truths, and now we're sharing these important truths with the rest of the world. So get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you too are about to be a part of history. We welcome each one of you to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel and your Republic if you so choose. But before we go into our broadcast tonight, please bow your head in prayer. Lord, we want to thank you for this opportunity to once again tell the truth. Father God, bless the people on this call, protect them. We want to thank you for them. We ask you, Lord, that you cover them and that you keep them safe from injury or harm or attack. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Mr. Happel, I yield the floor.
Well, I want to welcome everyone to our radio show tonight, Thursday, and we are tonight joined by Elaine Willman, and our program tonight is called The Desperate Battle for Rural America, the Role of Private Property in Defending Liberty. And Elaine has been our guest before on this program, talking about the Indigenous Peoples Treaties, the water rights issues that are associated with tribal lands. And tonight, Elaine is joining us so that we can have a conversation about that role right now and how that's changed over the last year or two. So with that said, Elaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan, and I hope it's appropriate to say that we are broadcasting from beautiful downtown Dillon, Montana, and with an audience of wonderful people. And I have to say that Dillon is one of the most unique, really attractive communities, absolutely spotless, not a piece of paper on the ground, and lovely people, so it's nice to be here. But our conversation tonight will be national. So I want to speak about things that are going across on a national level that are affecting the individual private property owner and citizen. And by national, I'm speaking of the interrelationship between the federal government working in coordination all too often with major environmental groups, and working in concert with many tribal groups who are seriously courting acceptance by the United Nations. And so we're sitting here in a country that has pretty much learned by spinning its knees. We've done a lot of things right, and we've done a lot of things wrong in our growing history of a young republic. But we are being confronted and assaulted by international intrusion on our property rights, environmental pressures to depopulate the land, take the food production out of the United States, and then in concert with very willing tribal leaders, not tribal families. I'm not speaking of tribal families or members per se. I make a separation between marvelous tribal families that live among us and this national Indian industry. And it is an industry. There's no doubt about it. The halls of Congress are crawling with lobbyists. The legal profession just thrives, legally representing 567 tribes. So this is an Indian industry that is now collaborating with environmental groups, the Agenda 21 folks, and a federal government that was going off the rails. The federal government that did not have the American citizens first. Did not have. For at least the last 8 years, I think you can go back to a couple other presidencies as well, in terms of the diminishment of the identity of American citizens, the American property owner. I mean, it's almost a shameful thing to be a property owner anymore. We're all supposed to go the collectivism way, and so these big pieces are bearing down. And the hopeful thing, I'm going to reveal it a little bit here, but I think the forgotten man and woman who've been suffering under this, whose property values have been going down, or whose easements on their property has denied them the use of their land, whose taxes are going up because tribal land acquisitions are taxed off the state tax base. The forgotten man and woman here, the property owners in this country, have just been beat down.
Well, one of the things I wanted to mention to Elaine, too, and we're talking about national issues with the reservation lands. In 2010, I believe, President Obama signed on to a UN treaty called the UN Indigenous Peoples Treaty. And in that treaty, the bottom line on that treaty is that all of the original lands that were occupied prior to European movement and settlement around the world will be returned to those people. That's the bottom line, that originally occupied those lands. And the fact that our U.S. president signed on to that is just absolutely amazing. Now, it's never been ratified. It's never been approved by Congress, but it is something that he signed on to. Elaine, would you like to maybe flesh that out a little bit?
Well, it sort of makes my blood boil when I even think about it, Dan, but it's like two things can't hold the same position. You either have the United Nations pushing to return all Aboriginal land to the natives that were here, or you have the United States. You don't have both. And I think this is where the pressure is coming from. There's an awful lot of folks that I don't know if it's envy, I don't know what the motivations are, but you have the One World Order movement, and the United Nations, and the Agenda 21, and 567 tribal governments that get annual funding from us taxpayers, and a monopoly on gaming. Apparently enough is never enough for some of these entities, and it's time for the United States to go away. I really think that you can't have Aboriginal land and state land. You can't have Aboriginal land and time immemorial and a country, the United States of America. And so all of this conversation has been increasingly buzzing across mainstream media and some of the other social media network systems. And the ones that, it is not a wonder to me, and it was the best thing that I've seen happen in a while, that the forgotten man and the forgotten woman, the people that are out growing the food, raising the cattle, going to work every day in the cities, the American citizens that are doing the best they can with what they have been completely not just marginalized, but diminished, ignored, trodden over. But you know what? that forgotten men and women quietly walked into the voting booth and stopped the train. Now, there's always forward momentum when a train stops. A big train engine is not going to stop on a dime. There's forward momentum, and we have a lot to work through. But I think these American people, American citizens, property owners, and folks here that built the West, built the East, built this country, I think they're going to come back. I think we're going to be all right. And we're a force to reckon with when we need to be. You can look back at the Revolutionary War and the few straggly revolutionary soldiers that took on the whole British Army. We can be okay when we want to be, but we're up against a pressure. I haven't even talked about the Eastern-Western civilization clash, and that too. This country is under pressure to be taken down from a range of sources. I mean, am I off the wall there, Dan?
No, Elaine, not at all. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what I wanted to really get this discussion going, because the people here that are in this audience many of them are in the agricultural industry, and they make their livelihood off the land, and people find this hard to believe, hard to comprehend, but I can guarantee after talking to literally thousands of people like yourself that are experts in various fields in the United States in, let's say, constitutional law and things like that, we are losing our country. This is not a battle to take lightly. This is literally a battle for the survival of rural America in the United States. And if we don't prevail within 2 generations, there won't be small agricultural producers and rural communities on the landscape. They'll be gone because ultimately they want to end rural America. Am I correct on that?
Rural America and all of America. There's some lovely people here in the old Depot Theater here in Dillon that I've been talking with earlier, and I was talking about the Montana values and the Montana people, and I think that it's kind of an analogy to rural American folks. The core values of our country are being torn apart. And a lot of it is coming through K through 12 curriculum. A lot of it is coming through the intentional disruption of the family unit. We have divorce is very trendy. Long-time marriages are passé. You can pick the gender you want to be now, and the absolute assault in the entertainment, if you just look on any channel on television or walk into any movie theater, the violence, the gore, the desensitizing of harming each other, on any television station, in any movie theater, there's very few high-value, lessons to be learned by our young. And the more and more they harm each other, well, isn't that cool? It just gets trendier. So we're destroying ourselves from within. And the rancher, the cattleman, the blue collar, the welder, the person that earns a living for his family and supports and keeps his family whole, they're fools. They're being diminished. Well, the beautiful thing is that those folks across our country that have that American core value, we just quietly went into the polls and we put in a president that has the same values. And I don't think there's another man on the planet, I'm kind of being political here, but I don't think there's another person on the planet that could withstand the assaults and the opposition and the obstruction that's going on to stop this train wreck, to keep America alive and well for at least 20 more years. Had he not won, I think this country would have been gone in 20 years, Dan.
Yes, Elaine, I agree with that. And the fact is that I think most Americans have felt completely powerless in dealing with this situation because they haven't known what to do. And one of the things that we need to understand is that our education system, without doubt, is being skewed to teach communism and socialism in our school systems. And you can look in any textbook in virtually any school in the country, at least public school, and you will find how that is actually being taught to our kids in not just small doses, but now in big doses. And we need to get Americans to wake up to the reality of how close we have come to the end of this country and how hard we need to fight to get it back.
Agree. One of the things, this is a little bit off subject, but one of the things that has just broken my heart, I'm 73 years old, and I'm from French and Indian ancestry, Southern. All my family's from Virginia, migrated out to Oklahoma and Arkansas and out to California, the classic thing, blue-collar family, middle-income family. But there were women that were mentors to me, wonderful women that were mentors to me, and that have allowed me to have a really productive professional life working with local governments and doing what I do. And I'm at 73. You can believe that in the 80s and 90s, I was obstructed with the glass ceiling quite often, and low woman on the totem pole in many work settings. But I did fine. My point is, I look at these women's marches. I look at what is being modeled as the right kind of woman today, with those costumes, the vulgar costumes, with the diminishment of, a male is, what we heard Hillary Clinton say, the future is female. Everything to destroy our family values, our core values, the dignity of a true woman who also has a mind, that's all part of this taking down and diminishing what the American person really believes and really is. And that, I know that's a long stretch, but it ties in with almost being afraid to speak up and say, hey, wait a minute. Because if you speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, well, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, you're a racist, you're this and you're that. But we who were raised to be nice to each other and others and good people, we have to say, hey, wait a minute. We have to say, wait a minute, we matter. We always matter. And we have to take care of each other like we matter and educate each other like we matter and raise our children like they matter too. Because we have not mattered for 3 decades as Americans,
I think that's extremely well stated. The fact is that political correctness has really consumed our society, because now all we can really identify are the differences. We can't identify the things that we're alike with other Americans. There's no center, there's no purpose to the United States of America under this new system. And that's very intentional, because they intend to make world citizens out of everyone and make us equally poor and equally without rights.
And that same process that's affecting each of us as individuals across the country goes right back to the United Nations resolution that it's okay to put in ink with a world organization that indigenous people will have all of their lands back, to actually print that in ink and adopt that resolution with multi-countries, and then have our President of the United States sign that, is fundamentally saying it's cool that the United States cease to exist. Mm-hmm. And the people don't matter. That's really what that resolution is saying. And you know what? Nobody's writing. You won't hear it in mainstream media. Nobody's saying, hey, wait a minute. We do exist. We're 240, close to 50 years old, our country. And we're still learning by skinning our knees. We haven't done everything right. But we do exist. We do matter. And I am amazed at the silence and the apathy at a global resolution that would say very soon the United States would not, because there were others that were here first. But we're a country of equality. We're a country of equal opportunity. So that way, that plays in all the way to the top global nations, all the way down to you and me as individuals, and the pressure that is on us to protect our country.
Well, and that goes back, I guess, to the discussion of UN Agenda 21. I know there are a lot of people that, at least up until a few years ago, and I'm a nationally recognized speaker on Agenda 21, as you know, but up until within the last few years, people would look at you like you had three eyeballs when you started talking about UN Agenda 21. But UN Agenda 21 is literally the document that is driving 95% of all the laws and regulations that are written in the United States today. And it's called Sustainable Development. And Sustainable Development is UN Agenda 21, and in that, most forms of agriculture, certainly meat production, the eating of meat will be against the law because it will be unsustainable, according to these so-called experts. And I'd love to have your take on how you see UN Agenda 21 affecting rural America.
We're already seeing it in terms of these areas. Well, one of the ways it affects is that you had a previous administration that subscribed to all that. And in the last couple of decades, we have, in the United States has major river systems like the Mississippi River, the Missouri River, the Columbia River. And in these river systems that belong, and these are state waters in multiple states, but the river runs through multiple states. The federal government, under the Army Corps of Engineers, this is just an example of where Agenda 21 starts to play in and gets the job done secretly. There's a river watershed boundary drawn by the Army Corps of Engineers just arbitrarily around every little tributary that feeds into the Missouri. These major river systems have a board, management board that manages and monitors all the use of the rivers and the waters. And the priority of those boards for decades was agriculture and economic development, and tourism and recreation, and on down. And it also provided the waters of needed under the Winter's Doctrine for Indian tribes and reservations. But the priority of the river systems was for decades agriculture, irrigation, economic development. That's all shifted around in the last 10 years. And now the priority is cultural resources, protecting the cultural resources of Aboriginal tribes, and the Endangered Species Act. And somewhere down that food chain is a little leftover water for irrigation. Now, the whole San Joaquin Valley, under using the Endangered Species Act, was wiped out. 20 million, I don't know how many millions of acres, but it's 20% of America's food was and it's a dust bowl. The 4 dams are about to go down in the Klamath, in the Oregon, Northern California area. That's the agricultural area there. 2 dams are up for grabs in Oregon and in Washington for being breached and taken down. And every effort to divert water away from food production and animal production is being implemented brutally. Ask the Hammonds, ask the Bundys. The water is being diverted. Well, water is life. Water is life or not life on your land. And it's all being diverted with the assistance of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. who are tied in with and enamored of the United Nations. We are falling from within. We're getting big pushes from without, but we've been falling from within. And that person that tries to protect himself, can wind up as a political prisoner, like the Bundys and the Hammonds, we now have an Amish farmer in Kentucky. I don't know if you folks have heard about this. An Amish farmer in Kentucky, he's 58 years old, father of 12. And he's supported his family on making healing salve out of chickweed and rosemary and thyme and herbs that he and his family grow. And he's done this for 20, 30 years. Well, he used the word cure on one of his labels and got into trouble with the FDA. And so he changed the label. And then he drew up some pamphlets to put by his products that he's made at home and sold himself. Long story short, that man, the FDA in full camouflage regalia and whatnot, go onto this Amish farmer's land in Kentucky and handcuff him and take him away and put him in prison. He is in prison without bail. He has no legal counsel because Amish don't believe in resisting and he doesn't know the law. And he is stuck in a prison facing court in 68 years as a drug trafficker for selling his salve, his herbs, across state line. Now that's what I mean about the train stops, because we now have Senator Jason Chaffee trying to demilitarize the BLM and the Fish and Wildlife. Well, we need to demilitarize the Food and Drug. All the benign federal agencies are highly militarized, and all of them have been in concert with Agenda 21 and the One World Order. And now a lowly Amish family is another target, like Joe Robertson here in Montana, sitting in a prison, 76-year-old veteran, sitting in a prison, over a mud puddle that EPA had no authority over his property, and he's in prison. The train has stopped. I mean, we got to the polls. We have a different administration, but the forward momentum and undoing this stuff is going to be very, very difficult. So,
well, I know one of the things, and you're right. The discussion with Joe Robertson is a perfect example, because he had all the permits that he knew he had the right permits. He had approval to do this. He put in a couple of ponds and one major one large one, but it wasn't all that big. And he did it for a combination of wildlife, but also so that there'd be some water retention up there for fighting wildfires. And that was what the intention was. And the EPA came in and literally they arrested, they tried him, and he is now serving, I think it's 6 years, is his prison sentence, I think it is.
And they may have reduced it down to 18 months, but he's been in there a good 4 or 5 months already.
Yeah.
He's a very ill man.
Right.
Serious medical problems, and they're letting him rot.
And he had the rights to do that. I think people need to understand that under President Bill Clinton, in 1994, he actually implemented what was called the President's Council on Sustainable Development. He created documents, and in that, it transferred the federal government from upholding, protecting, and defending the Constitution and being there to serve the people. It turned into they're there now to serve the environment and the environmental interests. And that's what that whole document. And since then, since 1994, I think that's when we've seen this tremendous shift in the direction of our country.
That comes to mind that has to do with international movement, and that is the BLM has been driving off cattle grazing off the lease lands pretty seriously and, militaristically. At the same time, the country of origin labeling, which used to be a requirement, disappeared. So the cattle production, animal production is going way, way down, and I've got some friends that are in that industry. They're saying that the cattle prices are, things are not good, and the supply is not good. So now that the country of origin labeling is off the now when you go into the stores, you don't know where that meat is coming from. Most of the cattle's coming in from Argentina and Venezuela now, while they're hammering on America's cattlemen in production. And this is part of the taking down of the country. You can look under any rock You can look at any federal agency, and there seems to be this mentality that, well, we're not as important as the whole world. You know, we need to just get into this collectivism stuff, and it's just terrifying to me. I have a great-grandchild. He's a little over a year old, and if we don't get this turned around, he won't live in the country I grew up in. You know, he won't.
No, Elaine, you're absolutely right. And the other thing that's going to happen with this this transfer is that rural America will cease to exist as we know it. I mean, we will literally be captives of our government in large complexes of people. And I know there's a lot of people who think that sounds really off the wall. Well, guess what? They've even announced a lot of this stuff. And the UN had a big conference down in, I believe it was in Peru. And at that conference, they talked about the sustainable habitat, and under their plan, people will be living in under 400 square feet. And, you know, I'm sure that number will probably go down when they get to the point where they think they can. So we've got a lot of problems, and just appreciate the fact that that you are willing to get out and talk to the people about that.
Let's talk about some of the solutions. I really think that some of the solutions are sitting right in this room, in the Depot Theater in Dillon, and I really think that some of the solutions, every one of the problem solvers, were those people who went into the polls, the forgotten man and woman who said, wait just a minute, and turned this. You know, and what we have to do as those voters that want our country back, we have to keep moving. We have to act like it's voting day every day. We have to educate our next of kin, our neighbors and family. We have to talk and write and communicate and educate outside of the K-12 curriculum that's so corrupt right now. There's a lot of things that the solutions, we're there. And we have to be there and pray daily for our current administration, the safety of those leaders who are up against a lot of odds. There's a lot we can do to take this back. And we have to keep that forward momentum going. I kind of think we're up to it. I really do.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Elaine. And, you know, we've still got a time to talk about a lot of these subjects, a lot of these issues, but the primary thing we need to get people, Americans, to do is read, learn, listen, understand, and don't go looking at the fake news. Go find out. The Internet is an excellent source of real news, and there are a lot of broadcasts that are on the air. Ours is one of them, and we're actually reaching 4.7 million listeners with this broadcast. So we need to get the average Americans to realize just how serious this is and to take the time to learn.
Yes, and share. I'm a singing canary on this subject. I write and talk and read and talk. And, we need to be Johnny Appleseeds about our country, but it begins with our family. We're informing ourselves, talking to our kids, grandkids, cousins. And, I mean, that's where it starts, is resurrecting the American values and communicating. Put the cell phones down at dinner, and you know what I mean? That we have to do this to withstand the external pressures and the obstruction that's going on domestically here. The obstruction of the new administration is ugly and unlawful, and I think it will come to some justice. So, anyway.
Well, I think average Americans always understood, under our Constitution, Congress is there to write laws. The President is there to strictly to make sure that the administrative rule is followed, but after Congress writes the laws, and the Supreme Court is there to interpret the constitutionality of the laws. And under our new system, 95% of all new laws and regulations are written by unelected bureaucrats who occupy agencies, and they become hard law, they become administrative law, and our Congress has been on the back burner for a long time, and they've allowed that to happen because they've pretty much been bought out.
Yeah, I call them coin-operated elected officials, They are, and that makes it harder for one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote to make a difference. And it makes it harder when we're sitting in front of our elected officials as an individual representing maybe one family or one community. It's hard to matter to that person that elected official who's been funded heavily by one NGO or, who knows, or the tribes. One of the other big problems that I'm working really hard to get rid of is that the tribal governments can write a check from their general treasury, which is our taxpayer dollars. They can write checks to political candidates and political parties, and they have inordinately overpowered a lot of our state legislators, even local county, and up to our federal senators and congressmen. The enrolled tribal members represent 0.5% of America's population. But the big gaming money and the tribal checks going out to political parties and candidates, they own these many senators and governors. And they literally do. No other American government can do that. A state, county, city, town cannot write a check they cannot participate in America's elections. Why? Is one little federal election advisory opinion back in 2000 allowing all these tribes to participate in our elections. It is dead wrong and felony stupid. I have sent packets back to the Department of Justice. We are making real efforts to get that knocked out, to create a level playing field and put it back to one person, one vote. That's another step that we can take, and I hope we get it accomplished soon.
Well, I think, Elaine, too, and you elaborated on this a little bit earlier, but the fact that so many of these Indian tribes, they are claiming sovereignty, that they are a sovereign government unto themselves, but yet at the same time, the government is sending them our tax money as support for all their programs, and we are allowing them to elect in Montana. They're a huge part of our representative government. If you look at the number of Native Americans who are in our legislature, it's disproportionate. And yet they're a sovereign nation, but yet they can elect individuals and be represented in all of our government. That doesn't make any sense.
And you never hear tribes say, we're federally recognized. They say, we're sovereign. We're sovereign. These federally recognized tribes exist at the pleasure of Congress. They only exist because Congress permits them to. They're federally recognized. They have a tribal constitution which must be approved. In the 50s, a whole lot of reservations went away and tribal governments were terminated when Congress was in that termination mode. So how sovereign can a government be when its mere existence is completely reliant upon Congress or the Department of Interior? How sovereign is that? How sovereign is a government whose funding comes from American taxpayer dollars at the same time they're wanting to kick the Europeans off the reservation and off the continent? There's only 3 sovereignties in the Constitution, and tribal government sovereignty is not one of them. It isn't in there.
Right, that's exactly right. And the thing that I think a lot of people need to understand is that the federal government did not really have the right to give them back their sovereignty, because under our Constitution we all have sovereignty and we all have rights, and they're called unalienable rights. And the whole attempt prior to 1934 was to assimilate the Native Americans into our culture, and since 1934, it's gone the opposite direction.
Right, that's one of my favorite words. Favorite words to talk about. Assimilation. Yeah, that John Collier in 1934, when he reversed all this, where Indians were given the Allotment Act and they were allowed to own land, be citizens of their state, vote, where assimilation was moving forward rather well, it got reversed with the 1934 Reorganization Act, and now it's, well, they want to live communally. They should live communally. Their culture is better off living apart from others and on their own land and this and that. Okay? And we're in 2017. I lived on the Yakima Reservation for 16 years. I've lived on the Oneida Reservation in Wisconsin 8 years. And I've been out here on the Flathead in Montana 2 more years. I've been all over the country in writing books and doing video interviews with on 17 other reservations. And it's hard for me to find an American Indian alive today, on a reservation or not, that hasn't ridden in an automobile, doesn't have a cell phone, flat screen TV, goes to good jobs at the casino, pouring his money into the slots. I don't know of too many living American Indians. There may be a few from the Navajo or some of the remote areas. There may be a few. But I would bet money that every living Native, 90% or more of your American Indians that are enrolled tribal members, that are, puppets and pawns for this industry, they're as assimilated as you and me. And they speak English as their primary language, but they get the government to fund them all these money for their tribal languages. They're as assimilated as all of us now. But they don't want the game to be over. They really don't want that game's too good for a few leaders. Yeah, not for the. I mean, there was a time when I think all of us Americans had a high regard or fundamental respect for the Native American, the American Indian. The American Indian was as big a part of our history as the settler. I mean, they really were. They just truly were. Well, now the perception of American Indians is, it's those poor folks on the reservation or the casino Indians. Their own reputation as a culture has been so tarnished by the corruption that I would love to see the respect for that ancestry restored to what it once was. I really would.
Well, and that begs the point that you're leading up to, is that before the white man came, before we settled North America, the indigenous peoples were a Stone Age culture. They didn't have metal. They didn't have literally anything. Before the Spaniards came, they didn't even have horses. They would go out with a stone spear and run down a herd of buffalo and run them off a cliff somewhere, and that was the only way they could get enough meat to survive. And the fact is that the culture, the reason there were only 5 million Native Americans in the whole continent of North America was because they spent an awful lot of time killing each other. Their lives were very, very difficult because they lived in very difficult conditions. They were mostly nomads. They traveled with the various herds and so forth. And they had a really tough existence. And I can't imagine too many Native Americans wanting to go back to that culture.
They just want the non-Native Americans off their reservations, but then who's going to... Where do they go for their groceries and their shops and their businesses and their jobs? I mean, it is the homesteaders that came out and joined with the Indians on the reservations that created thriving economies and resources for the Indians, for their neighbors. And there was a time when it was really very decent, live and let live, and very mutually respectful relationships when we had these checkerboarded reservations. But the gaming changed it. The money and the power just totally disrupted generations of mutual respect. And so now it's gotten so powerful, they want everybody gone. Well, what's a reservation going to look like when there's not a store open anywhere, there's nothing growing anywhere? What's that going to look like? You know, I think they need to revisit assimilation and realize it's already happened, you know?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and we need each other. We need their cultures need us, and we need their cultures, but certainly not under a communist system. And that's really, if you look at virtually all of the Aboriginal cultures, you're looking at a total lack of understanding of property rights, and that is the one difference between Europeans and Eastern cultures and the indigenous peoples, is that we understand that property rights have value, and with those property rights, we're much better stewards of the land than we would be if we all shared it commonly.
Out in the first origins of the country, John Smith, you know, where the first pilgrims ever were working the land communally and sharing of the food communally, and there were those that were working hard and those that were laying back. And John Smith reversed it and said, "You have this piece of ground, you grow your food or starve." You know, I mean that
Jamestown, the first
Jamestown, absolutely. That's where we got the self-reliance and independence and ownership of a piece of ground and maintenance of that piece of ground started there, and has been sustained across the country and is now under attack, you know.
Well, it's definitely time to bring our country back from this crazy so-called sustainable development paradigm. And I think a lot of the people that are here tonight were here to hear about your experiences with the tribal leadership. One of the things that you've expressed, and I agree with, is that the leadership is really the part that's dragging the rest of the tribe through this mess.
I have found on all the reservations I've lived within and visited that the tribal members are as uninformed and clueless as anybody else on the reservation. The other thing is that tribal members have no civil rights, and they have no parental rights, and they cannot speak up or disagree with their leadership. So that's why the leadership does what they want, and they don't inform their tribal members. There isn't necessarily free speech. There isn't public notice of public hearings. They don't knock themselves out to inform and increase the quality of life of their members. They're too busy grabbing land and chasing everybody else away. And if you roll that all the way forward and take all the inventions of modern history away, if you look at United Nations Indigenous Resolution and say, okay, you guys, you can have all your Aboriginal land back, but we're going to remove the electricity, we're going to move everything that caused you to function well, and you're back to walking on foot across the country. I don't think that's what the American Indian wants anymore. They should be able to revere their history and completely respect it without returning to it, to the Stone Age, as you call it, you know? But they're singing that tune. And the United Nations and the environmentalists that they want to depopulate, well, everybody's in that chorus. Terrible.
Well, it is, and one of the things that came out of Agenda 21, which we're both real familiar with, is the reduction of the human population to fewer than 1 billion people. Well, that means basically about an 88 or 90% reduction in the human population. And they plan to do that, and a great way to do that, we deindustrialize the country, we go back to really primitive ways of life, and our birth rate and our death rate will, our birth rate will go down and our death rate will go up. And people say, well, how in the world could they get the population down to fewer than 1 billion people? Food.
Yeah.
If we're not raising food, if we're no longer raising food and livestock, then all of a sudden they can control an awful lot of our lives.
Well, and fold in the Eastern-Western civilization clash. You know, the Western cultures are not having children at the same birth rate that the Eastern cultures are. And when you say to take away the food, the overpopulation and overwhelming of a very different culture that has a disdain for anyone that doesn't follow their beliefs must die. You know, this Eastern-Western clash is really heavy duty. It's already in this country. It's just overwhelming Sweden and Norway and Finland and Germany, and it is full-blown here. And that's another way to depopulate a large portion of this country if we don't keep our eyes wide open on that as well, you know.
Well, and I guess did you mention how the reservations are allowing a number of Middle Eastern people to come into the area? But that is a huge thing, because I know in Canada they're building mosques up there. They the local people recognize that. And the lady that you mentioned who called you from Quebec to talk to you about how awful things had become up there.
What I was told, I had done a talk show on another program that has an international audience, and I did receive a call from a woman in Quebec. And what I was told is that she was in tears. She'd never heard anybody speak of this. The United States, the Congress passed in 2012 the Hearth Act. Lovely little, it says it's Health, Education, Agriculture, the Hearth Act. And it allows tribal governments to long-term lease their trust lands to Middle Eastern countries for up to 75 years with no prior approval from BIA or oversight. They can just bring... the Obama administration is keenly aware that the American private sector has had its problems, doing business on reservations, and if things go wrong, you can't sue the tribe. If you build buildings and don't get paid, or you provide services and don't get paid, you can't sue. They have sovereign immunity. So Obama's decided the wealthy Middle Eastern countries would be really good economic development for our tribes on their private trust lands. And that's in the Hearth Act of 2012. So I was talking about that on that other radio show when this woman told me that in Quebec, or they call them reserves, not reservations, and the reserves all along the northern Canadian boundary, our northern border, there are mosques on all the reserves, and it is Iran and Pakistan that are very active in Canada on the Canadian Native American reserves. In our country, it is Turkey and Saudi Arabia. And even as we speak, and earlier, since 2009, the Salish Kootenai have done leadership exchanges with Turkey since 2009, student exchanges with Turkey. And these are very, when you think about sanctuary cities, maybe 340 sanctuary cities, or refugee cities that want to bring in the refugees, and then you add to that, it's about 340, because a couple of hundred of the tribes are up in Alaska, 340 additional quiet, secret spots to bring in a tribalism culture that is not fond of America. You have polka dotted this country with sanctuary cities and quiet spaces on Indian reservations with people that don't have our best interests at heart. Or as one of our famous leaders says, that we want them to love America. We want you to love being here and love the American people. It's okay to love America. we need to start loving ourselves and each other a bunch more, and requiring that anybody coming in at least respect America and not have an intent to harm its people. But this is all folded in with the other larger issues we've been talking about, Dan.
Well, I'll tell you, that is a terrific discussion, and it is all tied together, and it is all part of sustainable development, UN Agenda 21. It's also part of the Indigenous Peoples Treaty. We have to realize that all these things overlap and really are tied together in one way or another. Elaine, we're getting toward the end of the show, but I'd like to give you just a few minutes to talk about your books and talk about some of the programs that you're involved with, and let our listeners know how they can get more information on the things that you're doing.
Well, thank you. I think I mentioned, I may have mentioned, I did a road trip in the fall of 2004, with a wonderful videographer. We drove from Washington State to New York State across 17 Indian reservations. I call it the Thelma and Louise road trip because it was really life-changing. We wanted to get the story out because mainstream media will not discuss the agonies on reservations. So we took the camera, we drove one day, long story short, we were going to do a documentary because I promised every person we videoed that we would get their story told, but we videoed hundreds, couldn't tell all their stories, so I transcribed the videos into the book that is now going to pieces, and it was out in 2005. It's 2017, that book is selling as much as fast right now as it ever has, because all the things the tribal members, sheriffs, teachers, farmers, all the things the folks are worried about are right in our face right now in 2017. The second book I wrote was just last year, and that's a collection of my work with counties, my work with local governments, my work with community groups. It's articles I've written. It's kind of a how-to. It's kind of a handbook for community leaders and elected officials, and I've called it Slumbering Thunder. And it's a primer on federal Indian policy that I called Slumbering Thunder. When I got that title, I didn't want to call it, Federal Indian Policy Handbook. Oh, ho, hum. Who's going to read that? But I was watching PBS on the one evening when I was writing the book, trying to think, and it was a biography of our President Garfield. And all I knew about Garfield was that he was one of the presidents who was assassinated. But the story of Garfield was so amazing. As a young, poverty-stricken farm boy, lost his father when he was 3, raised by his mom, and, just total squalor, hard life, but a bright, bright young man. And his mother gave him $17 to go to college. In his second year of college, he was faculty at the college. And he said in this biography about him that he wanted to make a difference, that he had a slumbering thunder in his soul. And I thought, you know what? So do I. I can't leave this alone. This federal Indian policy, what's going on with the Eastern Western culture, I don't have another country. I'm not a tourist. I don't have another country. I only have this one. And I have no desire to try to find another one. So I have that same thunder, and I think many of us do. So that's where that name came from. But one's a handbook for elected officials, and the other is quite a story of what's going on in Indian country. Oh, and they're available online at one's Going to Pieces. The other Slumbering Thunder. They're available online at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble or any of the book sites. Or you can also YouTube my name, Elaine Willman, and there are YouTube videos on workshops that I've done, and the book will come up too.
Okay, well, thank you, Elaine. This has been a terrific discussion as always. We've done these shows before together, and it's always been a really, really good discussion. I thank you for being our guest tonight, and I thank our listeners for supporting Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and I ask that you please return with us next week for another show, and we will also continue to connect the dots. Thank you, and good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.